or theoretical scale, it's not even measurable yet, to those at the atomic scale and on up in size to visible light, microwaves, radio waves, and beyond, the entire cosmic phenomenon of electromagnetic radiation is quantized. This is what Max Planck discovered, and Einstein proved it, and he called the unit of the quantization a photon. And the fractal aspect is the harmonic relationship of that quantized field. And then the next aspect of wholeness that's important to understand is the synergetic nature, where the behavior of whole systems is greater than and unpredictable from the behavior of the parts when taken separately. It's really quite a fascinating phenomenon that Buckminster Fuller was deeply involved with, and he called his body of work about the geometry of nature. He called it synergetics. And another great pioneer in science and research, Arthur Young, said about this, only when the device is put together can it express its function and its purpose, something its parts alone could never do. Since purpose is in the whole and not in the parts, the whole must be greater than the parts. How can we account for this? Because the whole cannot function when divided. It follows that function is that aspect or cause which is not in the parts and which science cannot deal with, because science deals with mass, length, and time, which are parts. This leads to a basic cosmological postulate. The parts are derived from the whole and not the whole from the parts. In other words, the whole exists before the parts. Very important perspective shift on science, and of course in the spiritual science, I think that's a given. And it really informs how we even begin the process of investigating the nature of reality. Start from the whole, start from wholeness. And we're also starting from zero, another section of my book called Starting from Zero. And I wanted to just touch into this very simply here to describe the nature and the geometry of the 0-point field. Now, all energetic expression is dynamic fluctuation on either side of a zero reference, whether that's light waves or sound waves or breathing or walking or wind or you name it. Everything that's moving is fluctuating around a 0-point reference. And a key principle of the 0-point nature is equilibrium. And we can think of equilibrium as the balance between hot and cold to achieve a comfortable temperature in our home. Any kind of a balance where the dynamic forces stabilize into equilibrium. Now, Buckminster Fuller discovered that there is a geometry of this equilibrium state, and he called it a vector equilibrium. And you can see in this image here that all of the lines, the vectors, the edges on the outside, and all the ones going to the center are exactly the same length. As he said, the explosive outward force and the implosive inward force come into equilibrium. And this is the balanced 0-point state geometry here. And it's a 4-dimensional geometry. What that means is we're familiar with 3-dimensional coordinate system, the XYZ cubic space. The vector equilibrium is actually a 4-dimensional coordinate system. It has 4 hexagonal planes that are going through the center point. And it creates a 4-dimensional coordinate system that Buckminster Fuller came to understand is actually more accurate to how the universe is formed than the 3-dimensional one that we use. And I won't go into why that is so, but it's a very profound insight. I think it's very important. I also think as it relates to the pyramid geometry, that is, it's a octahedral space. And of course, the pyramids are half an octahedral form, which very much is directly then tied into this 0-point equilibrium geometry. And I think can give us some great insight into an aspect of the geometry of the pyramids and their effects that we are experiencing. Buckminster Fuller said about the vector equilibrium, it is absolutely dead center of universe and will never be seen by man in any physical experience. Yet it is the frame of reference, and it is not in rotation, and it is sizeless and timeless. So it's the state of the universe that transcends time and space. And we now understand there's a geometry to that. And actually the underlying field, what we call the Planck field of electromagnetic vibration at the tiniest scale, is actually in this equilibrium state in the unified physics theory. Bucky Fuller said, equilibrium between positive and negative is 0. The vector equilibrium is the true zero reference of the energetic mathematics. So it's important to know what the zero reference is. Now, the vector equilibrium, being the zero reference, is also the source of all vibration, because it has a dynamic pulsation that Fuller called the jitterbug. And what that looks like is we see these square faces that are open here. Well, they're not stable in their geometry, and they can collapse, and the whole thing can expand and contract and breathe and open. And this is what's happening throughout the entire universe to create the universe, this kind of emotion. And so this same form creates all of the platonic solids and all the vibrational activity in the universe. And that leads us to this next section here that I'm just going to touch into briefly about flow process. And the flow process, once the activity of the universe comes into being, it can achieve a dynamic equilibrium state. And the most coherent form of that is called the torus. And you can see the dynamic flow of energy around the outside and through the central vortex of this torus pattern here. And at the center of the torus is a still point center that's connecting back to the 0 point field. So all the dynamic systems are always connecting back into that universal 0 point field. And we ourselves have the same kind of a center point in our Dantian. I'm sure many or all of you are already familiar with this, and the chakras and the Dantian in the heart and the head. All are these center points that connect us back into this 0 point state in the dynamic equilibrium. Now, this toroidal dynamic flow process is fractal, and it's embedded one within the other to create the movement, the undivided wholeness and flowing movement that Bohm describes. And you can see a simple illustration of that embedded fractal toroidal vortex flow here. And we can see examples of that in the acorn and the apple and the tree, our own toroidal field around our bodies, our bioenergetic field, the magnetic field of the Earth, galaxies, everything all embedded in this coordinated, coherent, dynamic toroidal fractal flow. And that brings me to this, what I call the unified model of cosmometry, which starts to bring these pieces together. We see the vector equilibrium geometry with in orange, with also a green spherical version of the same geometry that's called a Genesa crystal. And that's the 0 point stillness that then fluctuates and pulsates to create the toroidal flow dynamic. And then across the middle of this model is what's called the phi double spiral, and that's where we're heading into next as we get towards the phi scaling angle. And this is a section of the book called Field Pattern, and it's about how the phi ratio shows up in the field of space around us. So it begins our exploration of this pattern begins by seeing that the patterns that we can see as two-dimensional representations are actually showing us three-dimensional phenomena that we can illustrate in these basic forms of energetic articulations. For example, the triangle and the square, the pentagon, hexagon, these all relate to forms in nature. The triangle with the radial area, the square with the cube of salt, pentagon with flowers, hexagon with snowflakes, the radials with the flowers and the shells, the rings with water, the spiral of the nautilus and the double spiral of the sunflower. All these patterns we can see very clearly in nature. And so we're going to focus now on this double spiral pattern at the center of the model. And this pattern is actually the cross-section of a torus. And you can see how, imagine how this whole toroidal flow dynamic would have this pattern throughout it. And again, here's what that pattern looks like from above, looking straight down on this double spiral field pattern. Now you'll notice I want to point out that which I call the phi boundary condition is a circle that actually emerges when you make this pattern from a single spiral and you duplicate it and rotate it. This boundary emerges.